Well, it's about time we talk about streaming. I kinda don't care for it. Yeah, okay, maybe not as novel of a statement as it was compared to a while ago, but I still want to start out with that. This video will also cover something important, however, that being how, despite what some seem to continually claim, physical media won't necessarily be the perfect solution for the issues of streaming. But don't worry, I'll show you what the ideal solution is. Besides the vendetta I have against Netflix, there's a variety of reasons I have for simply not caring for streaming. Speaking of Netflix though, well, tell me if you've heard this story before. In the beginning, there was only Netflix. If you wanted to stream movies or TV shows, it was probably on Netflix. But then after other companies realized this success, they all looked at that and said, hey, we have a big lineup of our own properties. Let's just make our own streaming service and charge people just as much for even less content than they would have had before. And that's about the present state of things. Now, ironically enough, if you wanted to be able to truly stream everything that's out there, you'd pay well over what it would have cost in a traditional cable subscription. But hey, at least in this setup, you don't have to watch ads. Oh wait, sorry, never mind, those are here too. So again, back in the before time, there weren't ads on streaming services. However, some of these companies realized that they could squeeze even more money out of the customers by putting ads in the middle of episodes, or even movies as well. They started out with ads only playing on free tiers, which, okay, you know what, that's actually fair if it's the free tier. It at least makes some sense. After that, however, the ads also started encroaching on the paid tiers as well, with what seems like some streaming services not even including a tier without ads anymore. But okay, that's fine, because at least you get the entire back catalog of some of these companies all in one convenient place. It's not all there, is it? Okay, I'm sure people think I'm going to talk about delisted content, and I certainly will in a minute, but that implies that everything is on these streaming services to begin with. In fact, many of these issues with streaming services can range in how bad it gets, so let's start from the least bad. Some streaming services present content with incorrect aspect ratios, mainly 4:3 content displayed in 16:9, by just chopping off the top and bottom of the picture. Now this is usually an easy enough fix, but honestly, this practice should have died sometime in the early 2010s, so the fact that this is still happening and is the default option for many services is really annoying. Next up, missing episodes. Now sometimes this sort of thing makes sense, while other times it doesn't and we're left guessing. Sometimes an episode doesn't really hold up all that well, which I can sort of understand. Mind you, in this instance I would stick to the method of just adding a warning screen to the episode and call it a day. Personally, I don't think it's good to call these the definitive ways to watch some of these things, while also removing whole episodes. This also applies to movies that have been modified as well, which I still don't get. And then there are times where this doesn't make sense at all, such as with the example I'm going to use yet again, that being the SpongeBob episode Midlife Crustacean, which was pulled for the panty raid scene, except it was okay for years before that, so I don't get what the problem was here. The next issue we have is AI upscaling. Now look, I'm only mostly against AI upscaling. I think a competently done AI upscale project where everything is checked can be done well. However, I'm usually much more lenient on fan projects for this than I am on full studios. For a start, I generally think that the processing done by most modern screens for lower resolution content is fine enough. You know, bilinear upscaling and all of that. It isn't perfect, but I generally prefer it to AI simply making up details which don't actually exist. But hey, we'd obviously prefer these shows and movies to be in the highest quality possible, right? Yeah, and the companies usually own most or all of the source materials, most of which were recorded in higher quality than they were even broadcast anyway. So hey, maybe some of the studios could, I don't know, actually rescan old cells, re-render CGI effects. Oh, but no, that'd simply be too much work. If it's really that much work, then I'd prefer that they just not bother with all of this AI nonsense and claim it's as good as the real thing, because it sure as hell isn't. But don't worry, I've saved the worst for last. Okay, y'all know what it is, it's delisted shows. So if you know anything about streaming anymore, you know that streaming services are more than happy to take away shows seemingly at random. Oh, better watch a show or movie before it disappears for no reason, and I still don't get why this occurs. I mean, does it really cost that much to use the streaming backend you already have to stream media that you already have anyway? This practice is seriously super annoying, and is a painful reminder of just how very temporary streaming services can be. I used to remember people saying around the time streaming took off, why would I bother with the hassle of physical media? I can view all of it streaming instead. And now a bunch of shows are gone and are never coming back. In which case, so much for that argument. But wait, I just mentioned physical media. Truly the savior for all of these issues, right? The light in the darkness that is the stupidity of streaming services. Well... So let's quickly start off with the pros of physical media. Obviously, you own it forever. Oh, don't worry, we'll be discussing that asterisk in a bit. Next, you don't have to watch ads. Okay, another asterisk. Yeah, more recent formats have tried to make it increasingly difficult to skip ads. The good news is that these aren't interrupting your show or movie halfway through or anything, but at the beginning of the disc, it can sometimes be difficult to skip. There's also bonus features. Yep, the asterisk again. We'll get to it. And the content you do get is almost always in higher quality. Huh, no asterisk this time. Okay, fine, but this one is simple. Apparently some studios have been implementing AI into their more recent releases of certain movies. This is still largely experimental, but this means that sometimes you can actually wind up with the Ultimate Deluxe 4K Blu-ray edition that has worse quality compared to an older copy of the same movie because the film director decided to huff paint fumes that morning and decided that running their movie through an AI upscale would be just a brilliant way to enhance it. So you have to look out for those sorts of things as well. And again, this isn't very common, but it does happen from time to time. Oh yeah, and also every single one of these players can play the disc. Alright, I get it! Yeah, while I like physical media, it does have its drawbacks. Let's discuss both DVD and Blu-ray and explain each of them. Now, most of the asterisks I mentioned earlier don't really apply to DVDs. For example, you really do own it forever. It'll work on nearly any DVD player in existence. You can rip the data off of the DVD if you really want, and you can usually skip ads. Usually. Now there's one issue with DVDs, which could arguably be considered to be more of an inconvenience than anything, depending on what you're watching. DVD has a lower resolution of 480i compared to newer formats, such as Blu-ray, which maxes out at 4K. However, if the content you're watching never got an HD release to begin with, then this doesn't really matter. Again, aside from the lower resolution, DVD is a pretty good solution here. The only thing stopping you from owning your media is the literal decay of your DVDs, which does happen to be fair, and I still recommend that people make archived copies of their discs. Most of the aforementioned asterisks apply to Blu-ray here. Now look, I don't think Blu-ray is a bad format on paper. It's supposedly more durable than DVD, it holds more data, is higher resolution, and so on. However, there's a bit of a catch with some of these things. Let's start with the biggest concern. Oh, you own your media forever, right? Sort of. So back in the DVD era, studios wanted encryption on their discs to prevent horrible people from, oh no, being able to back up their discs. Oh yeah, and piracy, that too. However, these encryption keys were hard-coded into the DVD specifications, but the encryption standard used was hilariously weak, even by 90s standards. And since they couldn't really go back and retroactively fix this, every single DVD had this issue. The studios didn't want a repeat of this fiasco for Blu-ray though, so instead they had Blu-ray discs use encryption keys both on the disc and with the use of firmware updates. Oh, I think we know where this is going. Now these updates would basically tell the player when certain keys had been broken. With some discs, all of this encryption stuff happens behind the scenes without any issues. And you know what? That's fine. If it's completely invisible to the end user, I don't really care. But for some Blu-ray players, you need to connect it to the internet to get firmware updates. If you don't, or unlucky you, the update servers are down, too bad, you don't get to play your disc. There are ways around this, but it's not nearly the same plug-and-play solution that DVD is. But it's a bit annoying when people say that physical media is the ultimate solution, which is sort of true, but they also neglect to mention that certain discs won't work in certain players because of this anti-consumer nonsense. Speaking of certain players, there are multiple types of Blu-ray discs. There's standard Blu-ray discs, which should work in every single type of Blu-ray player. Then there's dual-layer Blu-ray, which works in some players but not all. And finally, there's triple-layer Blu-rays, which only work in special 4K Blu-ray players. This is really annoying because this has suddenly turned a supposedly singular and ubiquitous Blu-ray format into 3 sort of sub-formats. Also, due to how 4K Blu-rays are manufactured, they're actually much less durable than their original counterparts, and much less so than DVDs. Oh, and heaven help you if you want to play your Blu-ray on your computer. You know, because only filthy pirates do that, right? In fact, let me just tell you the official way that you can play your own Blu-rays that you bought with your money on your computer. Again, this is the only official way to do this. So, do you have a 6th to 10th gen Intel processor? If you have AMD, sorry you're out of luck, idiot. Guess you should have picked Team Blue. What's that? Your processor is too new? Too bad you don't get to play Blu-rays. Okay, cool, you've got a 6th to 10th gen Intel processor. Alright, great. Now tell me, do you have a Windows version that supports this? Yeah, as it turns out, this whole method to keep Blu-rays encrypted was ironically enough a security vulnerability, so Microsoft patched it out. So if you're running any remotely modern version of Windows, such as Windows 10 or Windows 11, you probably won't be able to play your Blu-ray. But okay, let's say you haven't updated Windows, and you have a Blu-ray drive that supports the type of disk you're trying to use, and you have the right Intel processor. Then, and only then, can you play your Blu-rays through the one piece of official software that you're allowed to use it in. You're not allowed to use it in any others as far as I'm aware. What's that? You mean you're missing one or multiple of these very specific criteria? Too bad you don't get to play your Blu-rays on your computer, because as we all know, if you don't want to jump through all of these hoops, you must be a filthy, filthy pirate. Now, look, don't get me wrong, I still recommend Blu-ray over streaming whenever possible. The only way to play Blu-rays on your computer without going through all these hoops is to use special software which will help to crack the Blu-ray for you. Which, like I mentioned in the DVD section, is technically a violation of the DMCA and blah blah blah. How dare you want to actually play the disc that you own? How terrible. And you want to circumvent this anti-consumer nonsense. How evil of you. The next issue with Blu-ray is the lack of bonus features on many discs. DVDs used to have tons of bonus features, while now there sometimes aren't even any bonus features. I suppose they aren't the most required thing, but it's especially annoying when the DVD version of a movie has a bunch of bonus features, while the high-tech Blu-ray version has just the movie and maybe a commentary track. But the biggest issue with Blu-ray? Lack of titles. Now, this isn't exactly Blu-ray's fault, but there are so many shows and movies that are entirely absent from Blu-ray, in part due to streaming's massive takeover in the past decade. Many of the major companies find it better to just hoard all their content and also remove them whenever they want than to give out discs which can, horror of horrors, be played whenever people want and people don't have to watch ads partway through their content. This also applies to DVDs, which is also funnily enough the case with older discs simply due to a lack of availability. For example, let's say I want to watch the peak show that is Back at the Barnyard. Well, complete versions of the series on DVD, while they did exist at one point, are now incredibly difficult to come by. Other people seem to be making discs of this, which is more than can be said for some series, but even then these are of questionable quality. For example, one disc set I saw was simply using the Kiss cartoon versions of these episodes. So if it's only available on streaming, and it doesn't get a disc release, I guess that leaves only one other option, huh? Wait, but can't you purchase some of this content as digital downloads? Oh, right. That's a resounding sometimes, and there's a whole bunch of asterisks attached to it. In fact, I'd argue digital purchases of content are probably one of the worst ways to do this. Why? Well, because despite paying purchase price, you often don't actually own the content, and so the companies can still take away your purchase anytime they want. These purchases are also usually so restrictive that they're locked either to an account, or at times even to a specific device. At least with streaming, you can sign on to multiple devices and usually be fine. But this sounds like a good option until, you can't transfer your downloads, and also now the company is taking away your purchase from you. So again, I must say that if you can't stream the content, your purchases can be taken away from you at random, and it doesn't even exist on disc. When companies make it difficult or even impossible to watch this media, it seems there's no choice but to pirate, so pirate we must. Ironically, while I think you shouldn't pirate if you have other reasonable methods to obtain this legitimately, piracy could also be considered the ultimate form of preservation and generally ensuring that you can watch this in the future. The discs don't slowly rot, the videos don't have any DRM to bypass, and it honestly just works. If you're really afraid of something happening to the original copy, just copy and paste it somewhere else. It's ironic too, because pirates are usually some of the best customers for some of this media, and would happily buy these things officially if they were available. However, when you get a better experience, or even better availability, simply by means of piracy, then why should anyone bother with the official versions? Especially if they aren't available to begin with. Now, for most of this video, I've been talking about movies and TV shows, but let's talk about video games as well. Now, the good news is that streaming games hasn't exactly been viable, and it seems like it won't be. For now. You know, your Google Stadias and what have you. However, I won't be surprised if another company tries to take a stab at it again sometime in the future, and that will definitely be a problem, one which I'm not entirely sure of a solution for, especially depending on the way the game is made and sold. But let's talk about the problems that exist currently. Movies and TV shows have a major advantage over games when it comes to preservation. That being that they play the exact same way every single time. That isn't the case, however, for video games, where each playthrough is almost always going to be different, and simply watching someone else play the game isn't a sufficient equivalent to actually playing the game yourself. And in this sense, physical media might save you, or it might not. You see, on a lot of recent generations of consoles, especially depending on the size of the game, the disc can either contain all of the game data, in which case you're probably fine, some of the game data, but the rest has to be downloaded, or in some instances, the disc is basically an overglorified key to let you even play the game, and not much else. There's also the issue of DLC or updates to consider as well. And PC games? Is there even an option to buy many PC games on disc anymore? Most people just buy games on Steam now. Sure, I know there are services like GOG where you can at least download offline installers, so that's at least something, although obviously not for all games. And on Steam, some games won't launch if you're not logged in, at least for a certain amount of time. So what happens if the Steam servers ever happen to go down? But I've discussed much of this before. Oh, and let's not forget otherwise single-player games which have mandatory online connectivity. Right, Ubisoft? Yeah, if the servers go down for that game, which of course companies like Ubisoft would never do, then too bad, no more game for you. So again, what's the solution?
We're gonna be pirate!
Look, I know that this is not only a much less elegant solution compared to the movie and TV show idea I mentioned earlier, but be honest, is there really much else that can be done? Sure, I'd like to have official ways to play these games in perpetuity, but since so many companies don't want to listen to us, at a certain point it feels as if piracy really is the only way to play games that you own. In fact, I'd even go so far as to argue that the situation here is even worse than for other forms of media because of how interactive a game is, as well as just how large some games are now. While I think everything before the PS4 and Xbox One era is relatively safe, Anything forward of that is at best a toss-up. Oh, and I haven't even gotten into scummy EULAs, which state things like how the company is only selling you a license and can take away your ability to play the game you purchased at any time, but I think you get the gist of it, and we don't want to be here all day now, do we? It's really the sad state of things, but that's how things work right now, I suppose. And the only long-term solution I can think of really is piracy. Do I want to pirate? No, of course not, but that seems to be the only realistic, practical solution. Sure, we could ask or even beg companies or governments to try and make a fix for this, and will that work in the future? Maybe, but that's all entirely uncertain. Say what you will about piracy, but when a game gets cracked, it at least works. I'm not hedging my bets on someone in Congress deciding, maybe we should allow people to continue using the things that they bought. Sorry if that sounds pessimistic, but it's really just the situation we're in right now. So to conclude, does streaming suck? Yes. It'd be great to have all these things on actual physical media, of course. Is physical media the be-all, end-all solution to all of this? Not exactly, but it's still better than streaming, even if some physical media has its own issues. And while I hate to say it, for the sake of simply preserving things, especially that which is unavailable, you're probably going to have to resort to piracy in some form. I really just wish that these companies would release their content properly, instead of falling back on a bunch of their stupid anti-consumer practices time and time again. But the main point of this video was to make it clear that streaming is terrible, and this whole issue of media being unavailable is really frustrating to me. However, I've also hopefully highlighted some of the issues with physical media as well. As a last thing about these bootleg DVD or Blu-ray makers, while the practice could be considered scummy, they're also helping to make physical copies of media that the official companies clearly couldn't be bothered to, so I guess my only request is that they're made using higher quality rips of the content. Well, that's all for now. Thank y'all for watching, and take care.
Hey folks, viewer mail time again. Oh, here's one from Sally, age 14. Dear Pig, aren't you interrupting the most suspenseful part? Well, the answer is keep those cards and letters coming.